I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today I'm testing this, the brand new Mercedes-AMG EQE53 4MATIC Plus SUV. Probably one of the longest names of the cars that I've tested this year. And if you're a subscriber, you'll know that about this time 12 months ago, I tested the base model EQE SUV, the rear-wheel drive one, and I thought that car was okay if you specified the correct options. Well, today we're testing the AMG version of the car, which is interesting because this is AMG's first effort at an SUV that's fully electric. Now, BMW have already done this, Porsche's just released the Macan electric overseas, and of course you can get products like the Tesla Model Y Performance, so AMG has taken its time. And in today's video, we're going to find out the reason why this car maybe needed a little bit of extra gestation and why it's not quite the perfect implementation of an AMG electric vehicle. This car does a lot of things right. There's also a few areas where it does a few things wrong, as we'll see in today's video. I'm going to take you through all of those and give you my opinion about who should buy this car. But before we get started, please hit subscribe down below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Now, one of the main reasons you might be considering buying an EQE AMG instead of a petrol Mercedes-AMG SUV is if you can charge at home. And frankly, if you're dropping this kind of cash on a large SUV like this, you probably do have options to charge at home. Well, this is actually quite a convenient electric SUV in that it can charge it up to 22 kilowatt AC. So if you've got three-phase charging available at home, or you can install a three-phase wall box, you'll be able to replenish this car's battery in just a few hours, which is great if you do heaps of miles. Of course, just with an ordinary wall box, you could recharge the vehicle overnight without too much stress. But if you're on the road and you're topping up the battery, we of course have DC CCS2 here, up to 170 kilowatt charging speed. The battery itself, 90.6 kilowatt hours of usable capacity, and the efficiency is, well, not great, just like the equivalent cars that the EQE53 competes with in this segment. Overall, I've been getting about 25 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. On the highway, around 22, which isn't too bad, but urban stop-start or country road work where you're really getting the most out of the motors, you're looking at just under 30 kilowatt hours per 100K. So this thing is a thirsty beast. Moving around the back of the EQE SUV now, it's certainly not up to me to tell you what kind of shapes and styles to like. That's so subjective. But for me, I personally don't love the egg-like cosmetics of Mercedes electric cars. You can definitely tell it's an EV and a real slave to aerodynamics at that. But compare the Mercedes approach to, say, Porsche and the new Macan electric. Unless you're a real anorak like me, and probably you if you're watching this channel, you wouldn't be able to tell that car from like a normal petrol Macan, and I personally prefer that. If you're into virtue signaling and luxury goods, however, the Mercedes EV styling might well be for you. The SUVs do seem to work better than the sedans in my book, however. Now, our EQE53 SUV on test is finished in soda light blue, which is this really lovely gunmetal grey blue color. That's a free option. I'd probably go for that. We do have behind the Mercedes star here the mechanism for the power tailgate, which is very prompt and silent, which I love. The boot itself is just okay. The opening aperture is wide enough. It's fairly low, so easy to load your stuff in. But look what we've got here. We've got two charging bags, Type 2 to Type 2 and a Type 2 to household. They're included with the car, which is an expectation at 200 grand, let's be honest. But because the underfloor area is so shallow, there's actually nowhere to stash the charging cables. So you've either got to chuck them into the garage at home or take them with you like this, where they're taking up maybe 10% of the boot space. So that's awkward. No spare tire on this car, just a tire repair kit under that boot floor there. But we do have, nice, decent quality blind. The rear seats fold 40-20-40. No third row in this vehicle. If you want that, you can get it on the EQS SUV, but there's no AMG version of that car. Controls up there to close the tailgate or close it and lock the vehicle, which means for us, it's time to talk about the real range you'll get from this car and the real efficiency, among other running costs. When it comes to your range, efficiency, and other running costs, this is another big, heavy, and pretty inefficient electric SUV. And that's going to have to be factored into your calculations if you're hoping to do a bunch of road trips with this car. So we have a 90.6 kilowatt hour usable battery in this vehicle, and the consumption is around 22 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers on the highway, which isn't too bad. But in town or on a country road, you can expect 25 or a bit higher. So you're going to be recharging this vehicle more often than you would if it was more efficient or if it had a bigger battery, because on both fronts, the EQE SUV is only average. Thankfully, the fast charging speeds are reasonable at 170 kilowatt peak DC, whereas the AC charging is up to 22 kilowatts. So if you've got three-phase power at home, then your recharging is actually quite quick. Even on a 7 or 11 kilowatt wall box, an overnight recharge will see you good to go in the EQE SUV. When it comes to servicing, Mercedes servicing plans are usually pretty expensive, and so it goes for the EQE SUV. About $4,000 for a 5-year, 125,000 kilometer service plan. The warranty is 10 years or 250,000 kilometers on the high voltage components, 5 years unlimited kilometers on the vehicle. Time to jump inside the EQE53 SUV, but before we get started, what the heck is an EQE53 SUV? Well, the E in the name, well actually there's two E's in the name. EQ means electric, although we think Mercedes is going to start transitioning their naming away from saying EQ in future. EQ electric, E means this car is the size of an E, meaning a Mercedes mid-size vehicle like an E-Class or a GLE SUV, which is kind of the combustion equivalent to this vehicle. Above the EQE sits the EQS, which we've also got a few tests of up on the Chasing Cars channel. But really, this vehicle goes up against cars like the BMW iX, or on the combustion side, its cousin the GLE, BMW X5, that kind of size. It's a decently proportioned 5-seater. And this one is the AMG version. As we find out when we take it for a drive, it is devastatingly fast, and AMG actually have taken a big look at the mechanicals and swapped out a bunch of the regular Mercedes stuff for bespoke motors, bespoke suspension, and the like, and it does make a big difference. But inside, we're really looking at almost the same interior as what we tested together a year ago in the rear-wheel drive EQE300, which in my view is probably the best value car in the EQE lineup. And most people won't need to go beyond the EQE300. But if you like your Benzes all singing and all dancing, and you want an EQE SUV, well, this is the one you'd want to buy. How much does it cost? Over $200,000 drive away officially. And here in Australia, Mercedes has moved to an agency pricing model, and there's no negotiation on the price. However, there's pretty good stock of EQE SUVs at Mercedes dealers in Australia, and I've noticed on the classifieds that quite a lot of them have been registered as demonstrators with very low mileage and $60,000 discounts for the EQE53. Yikes. At least that means this car could be a bit of a deal if you like the look of it. And certainly the interior presents as very impressive. We're sitting on really genuinely comfortable and supportive Napa leather seats. This one's got a dark color scheme, which I think probably suits the AMG nature of the car, but you can go for a blindingly white interior color scheme with a white steering wheel if that's what you prefer. And I'm a sicko, so I probably would prefer that. Looking forward, the EQE53 has the Hyperscreen as standard, which is this 56-inch piece of glass, which is kind of impressive, but the illusion is destroyed by the fact you can easily see the gaps in between the three screens. 12-inch one over here for me as the driver, another huge center screen here in the center, and then the passenger has basically the same center functions replicated, although they can watch streaming media and the driver can't see it, which is a pretty cool feature. Apple CarPlay is wireless, as is Android Auto, and that takes up the entire screen, and the Burmester stereo sounds really crisp and good, so really no concerns with the infotainment. Steering wheel almost rivals BMW for thickness, perforated Napa leather, paddle shifters for the regen, Manatino switches for your AMG controls, and then quite fiddly little controls for your infotainment shortcuts, but it's fine. Little bit of wood trim down here, but that's really all you get in terms of warmth, along with the Alcantara. The seats themselves are kind of massaging. It's called seat kinetics, plus heating and cooling. However, Mercedes still has a long way to go with bringing build quality back to where we expect for this brand and where it was 10 or 15 years ago. Have a listen. I mean, for God's sake, this is a company that has to do better than this. Mercedes tells us the best or nothing. Over here as well. So, you're in the corner, you're braced against the steering wheel and your weight shifts forward. Squeak, squeak. You rest your arm up here. Squeak, squeak. Down here. Squeaking. I mean, it's just nowhere near good enough, and rivals are significantly better in terms of how their interiors are stitched together. I'm getting tired of saying it, but I'm going to keep saying it until it improves. So Mercedes, I hope you're getting the message that your interior build quality needs work seriously. Okay, on a little bit of a lighter moment, you might think I'm being a little bit mean, but let's remember this is a 200 grand car, and I've got your interests at heart. I'm not here to represent any car manufacturers, just Australian car buyers. But now let's move on to something the EQE SUV does very well, and that's interior packaging and space. This thing has an incredible 3030mm wheelbase, which gives you an enormous cabin with vast legroom here in the second row. I'm 6 foot or 183 centimeters, and I have limo-like legroom behind my driving position, excellent tow room, headroom is good, and this is one of the few back seats in any EV which actually has sufficient thigh support. So you could do hours back here in absolute comfort. This is an excellent back seat, so well done, Mercedes. We have quad zone climate control in this car, so we can have separate temperature here, here, and the two front seats. We also still have those soft materials and actually not so squeaky here in the back, which is good to see. And still more speakers for the Burmester and a lovely amount of light and visibility here in the back. We can drop down this armrest here, little device holder or cup holders as well. All in all, the back seat of this car is actually one of its most impressive attributes. Okay, let's take a drive in the new EQE53, which you might be able to hear starts with a fairly entertaining soundtrack because this is another EV which mounts a sound generator beneath the body of the vehicle while also playing sounds through the Burmester speakers in the interior. So as you move down the road, the EQE53 is making a noise. Of course, you can turn that off, and this is either a feature that you'll love or you'll hate, but it's certainly an emerging trend in performance EVs, and I think we're probably going to see a bit more of it. Now, what AMG has not done to the EQE53 is just slap its badge on Mercedes' existing homework. This vehicle has bespoke motors, a bespoke cooling system, and a bespoke suspension when compared to a standard Mercedes EQE. And that means that on paper at least, this thing is capable of absolutely staggering performance. So out of the box for your cash, you're getting 460 kilowatts of power and 950 Newton meters of torque, so not exactly lacking, but if you opt for the $7,200 Dynamic Plus package, the outputs are ticked up to 505 kilowatt peak and 1,000 Newton meters of torque. So that really puts the EQE53 in league with, old V12s and those sorts of powertrains that used to be the absolute top of the tree for AMG on the petrol side of the ledger. But does it feel that fast? Well, not really, not from behind the wheel. This is a 3.5 second car, which is a fast car by anyone's measure, I would suggest. And yet, partially because the EQE53 is very refined, but also partially because it is extremely heavy, a lot of those inputs are sort of blunted from your perspective behind the wheel here. And while it is devastatingly fast and it does cover ground from A to B very quickly indeed, you never really feel like you're driving something with supercar-esque acceleration. And that weight has clearly been a key factor which has been very difficult for the engineers of this car to overcome. And that hasn't been the case with some other very heavy EVs. You know, you look at the likes of the Porsche Taycan or the Polestar 3 or even the BMW iX, which is cosmetically certainly not to everybody's tastes, I think we could admit. Those cars are more satisfying to drive. In particular, the Polestar 3 in this SUV category just gives drivers more feedback and more fun than what you're getting in the EQE53. That being said, we are working with excellent mechanicals. The rear motor in particular is an incredibly beefy unit. It's the dominant one in the system, as you might expect. It's a 6-phase unit, 2 windings, 3 phases each, high RPM, and that allows, with a Dynamic Plus package, a top speed of 240 kilometers per hour. Probably quite academic here in Australia, but I have spent the last several days extensively road testing the EQE53, including on fast country roads, and you're certainly never lacking for performance in that environment, while it's also quite a placid commuter apart from a bit of chop from the huge 22-inch wheels, which I'll return to momentarily. That being said, dynamically, when you start moving more quickly, the EQE53's dominant characteristic is its suspension system, which dispenses with traditional anti-roll bars and instead adopts a 48-volt driven electromechanical compensation system on the front and rear axle. So in the center of those areas is a 3-stage planetary gear set, which basically can allow 160 times per second an alteration to what the left and right sides of the vehicle are doing. What this means is that on an uneven surface, when you're sort of driving gently, you're getting a better balance of body control and ride quality, and that actually does work pretty well in the car. Then when you start cornering fast, the two sides will twist against one another and essentially cancel out about 90% of the body roll that you'd be expecting in a situation like that. And that really is the uncanny sort of sense that you get when you're driving this car, is that the cornering is so flat. But that has a couple of effects. Well, firstly, it does allow this vehicle to hurtle around bends very fast indeed. However, you actually have to back off your inputs a little bit, because with so much flatness and so much capability, the EQE53 really does develop a natural understeer characteristic. And if you just yank the wheel and sort of stab the throttle into a corner, then it will just wash wide. So you have to slow things down, have a bit of patience, let the weight load up on the outside corner, and then start feeding in that absolutely prodigious torque. And that's the way to make progress in this vehicle. So it's certainly capable of those feats, but it holds you at a real distance from a feedback sense as a driver. You're sort of going fast, you're cornering fast, you're getting the job done, but it just doesn't feel that fun or that satisfying as you're doing it. And it's a certain X factor which some of this car's rivals have been better able to crack. I think part of it is steering feel, which is pretty much absent in the EQE53, and there's even a bit of a dead spot on center, so you have to turn the wheel initially more than you expect, but not too much, because the EQE53 has a very capable 4-wheel steering system with up to 9 degrees of turn. And in urban environments like this one, for this near hairpin, it's an absolute boon, because this car feels so agile. But at faster speeds, it is possible to slightly overdo your steering input when this car doesn't need so much. But of course, you adjust to that very quickly. As with any new car that you buy, you learn the way to drive it. The ride is acceptable. Overseas, you could have wheels as small as 20 inches. Here in Australia, 22s are the order of the day. It's never bad, it's never crashy, it's simply that in urban areas you are feeling the effect of a licorice thin, low profile Michelin Pilot Sport EV tyre and a massive wheel. Certainly you can tell what's going on with the road surface. We do have adaptive dampers, 2 chambers in the dampers. On a country road, you're actually going to want to use Sport mode for the damping rather than Comfort or Sport Plus, because it just ties down the control a bit better. But In urban areas, comfort has been the order of the day, and those settings are actually quite easily customizable either here on the steering wheel or through the large touchscreen. The braking is where I have a bit of a bugbear. The actual braking performance is excellent. We have enormous stoppers, front and rear, 6-piston calipers up front, and huge discs. Then we also have the regen system, which is alterable through the paddles. The issue is the blend of the two programs is not a happy marriage. It's based on the Mercedes iBooster system, and this is just not one of the more successful ways of blending regen and hydraulic brakes. The Porsche system in the Taycan, the way BMW does it, both more successful than this car. The brake pedal never feels natural in the EQE53, at least not to me. Refinement, typically good, bit of road noise, virtually no wind noise, and in fact, the area this car probably shines brightest is sitting on the highway at the national speed limit, just covering ground, which is probably where a lot of its talents would go to waste actually, because you're not really going around corners fast. But that's where this thing feels absolutely serene, and you can just enjoy the stereo, the seat comfort, the view out is all exceptional in this car. Also, a shout out to the safety systems, which are really subtle and well executed in the EQE53. Smooth adaptive cruise control, great 360-degree camera, really lets you place the car when parking nice and easily. The lane centering is slick and well calibrated, but is not grabbing at the wheel. And we don't have speed and attention nannies binging and bonging in this car. They've been deactivated for the Australian market as they're not legally required here. So far more than many of the vehicles I road test, this thing feels to have been tuned and set up well from a software perspective. And there's no arguing with what the EQE53 is capable of doing. It can do the job. You just start to wonder why you're not giggling as it happens. So what's my final verdict on the Mercedes-AMG EQE53 SUV? Well, honestly, this is a first generation product that really does feel like a first generation product. Some things AMG has nailed. The motors, the cooling, and the electromechanical compensation for body roll on this vehicle are all impressive, and they work precisely as they should. Other control surfaces are not quite there yet. The braking is weird, the steering has that little dead spot, and as a driver, you're just constantly held at a distance by the EQE53, and it ends up feeling pretty numb. It doesn't have to be this way. The iX-M60 and the Polestar 3 are two cars in this segment that actually do give you more feeling and engagement as a driver. Or you could test drive something like the Tesla Model Y Performance. Now, that's not really a luxury car, but it's much cheaper, it's also extremely fast, and it does the EV stuff of charging and efficiency to a higher level than this extremely dear Mercedes. And that's before you get to the interior build quality, which is way off from the heights of what Mercedes has done in the past, and therefore that we know Mercedes is capable of delivering. This is a really expensive car. Creaking and squeaking interiors when it's brand new is totally unacceptable, and that must be fixed. Now, that's just my opinion. Very keen to know yours, so let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit the subscribe button if you want to catch more fully independent road tests like this one. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.